was actually the defining feature that separated them from other primates. They walked on two legs, a trait called bipedalism. The first bipedal prehumans still spend time in trees, but around 2 million years ago, a different group, who were taller and had longer legs, became fully terrestrial. As for why they settled, those earliest movements out of Africa were driven by the need to find resources. Later, when they started making semi permanent settlements, they almost always chose places with abundant water. This was the most critical resource. Rich food sources, places with reliable access to wild grains, plentiful fish, or game. Favorable geography, river floodplains, and coastal areas were popular because they offered access to a wider variety of plants and animals. Thus, learning about the development of bipedalism, or the specific resources they used for settling, capture your interest more.
I think Google, hey Google, I think what I like to think about is how they decided to move.
That is a deep question. The decision for prehumans to move and migrate was mainly driven by geography and survival needs. Imagine two major forces acting on them. 1. Push factors, things driving them away. Climate change. Long term shifts, like the drying out of environments in Africa, forced them to seek new areas with water and vegetation. Resource depletion. If they hunted all the available game or used up the plants in one area, they had to move to find new sources. 2. Pull factors, things drawing them in. Abundant resources. They moved toward areas that offered reliable access to fresh water and plentiful food sources, like rivers or coastal regions. Favorable climate. They sought out places with a better chance of survival, like warmer areas during cold periods. These migrations weren't constant. They occurred in waves over vast periods, often during times when conditions made travel easier, like when lowered sea levels exposed land bridges. Does thinking about these push and pull factors help you understand their movement?
Yes, it does. Why they would be motivated to leave. What was the time periods of movement in between settlements?
Those early movements were not a single event, but multiple waves that took place over a massive span of time, beginning long before anatomically modern humans appeared. The first major expansions of pre-humans out of Africa and into Eurasia took place roughly between 2.1 million and 200,000 years ago. This initial movement was fragmentary and slow. Later, the ancestors of all non-African people today moved out of Africa in a major, more successful dispersal event that began around 70,000 to 50,000 years ago. The key push factor during these periods was often climate. Shifts in the Earth's orbit caused climate cycles that resulted in severe droughts and changes in vegetation, making certain regions unlivable and opening up land bridges for movement. Would you be interested in hearing more about what allowed these pre-humans to survive the harsh climates outside of Africa during those early migrations?
Yes, of course.
One of the most crucial elements that allowed early pre-humans to survive outside the warm African climate was the mastery of fire. Evidence suggests that controlled fire use emerged as far back as 1.5 million years ago. Fire provided three vital benefits that allowed them to colonize colder, new environments. 1. Warmth. It offered essential heat, letting them survive freezing nights. 2. Safety. It kept large predators away from their sleeping sites. 3. Nutrition. It allowed them to cook food, which made it safer to eat and significantly easier to digest. The improved digestion from cooking meant they gained more energy from the same amount of food, which was key to developing bigger brains and surviving the demanding journey. Do you want to focus on how fire changed their diet and brain development, or how it contributed to their social life?
I think that's all very interesting, but do you think that I need to know why fire was such a forced necessity that without it we would not be able to eat or make it through a cold night?
That's a brilliant way to phrase it. Fire was truly a necessary force. The reason fire was so critical for survival and movement boils down to energy, both for staying warm and for eating. For survival in colder climates, fire provided warmth and protection from predators at night, especially after early humans left the warmer areas of Africa. Without it, the energy spent shivering, and the risk of being attacked in the dark would have been too high to survive in new environments. For eating, fire was a game changer because cooking increases the number of usable calories in food. Cooking breaks down tough plant fibers and animal connective tissue, which essentially pre-digest the food. This meant early humans spent less time chewing and digesting, and they got much more energy from the same amount of food. This massive energy surplus is what fueled the evolution of larger, more complex human brains, which demand a lot of calories to run. So fire didn't just warm them, it unlocked the nutritional energy necessary for their biological and geographic expansion. Does that connection between fire energy and brain size make the necessity clearer?
Well, it begs me to ask what happened to the ones that could not manage fire or did not want to.
That's a very insightful question about natural selection. For prehumans who couldn't or didn't use fire, their survival would have been a grueling uphill battle. Without fire, they would have been forced to stay on a completely raw diet. This meant spending much more time and energy chewing and digesting tough foods, leading to a much lower net caloric intake. Since a lack of cooked food means less energy for the brain to grow, this group would likely have had smaller brains and less cognitive development, slowing their evolutionary progress toward modern humans. Also, without the warmth, protection, and cooking benefits of fire, these groups would have been severely limited geographically. They wouldn't have been able to successfully move into colder, more challenging environments outside of tropical and subtropical zones. In a sense, the ones who failed to adopt fire would have been outcompeted, both physically and geographically, by the groups that mastered it. Do you have any more questions about the evolutionary pressures of fire?
There's probably so much more information about it. So go ahead.
Absolutely. There is a lot more to cover. The long-term use of fire didn't just change pre-human biology, it fundamentally reshaped their social structure. Gatherings around the hearth became the first social hub of the species. This meant the introduction of new behaviors, like sharing cooked food and cooperating to maintain the fire, which strengthened group bonds. Furthermore, the darkness around the fire was conquered, opening up the night for activities. This extended social time is thought to have provided a setting for early forms of language development and the passing down of knowledge, since they had a safe, warm place to gather and talk after hunting was done for the day. This ability to control an external energy source, fire, is considered by many scientists to be the first major technological leap, setting the stage for everything that followed. Does the social and communication aspect of fire intrigue you, or would you like to know more about the archaeological evidence that proves they used it?
I think the arch whatever the evidence is, just evidence. I don't have to look deeper. But do you think that the forced relationships was an issue, because it seems that you would need to have strong bonds with potentially annoying or violent people?
That's a very sharp and practical observation. You're right, developing those strong bonds in early social groups must have been incredibly challenging, and conflict was absolutely an issue. When early humans settled around fire, the groups became more interdependent, meaning they relied on each other more for safety and for successful hunting. This required a huge shift from purely self interested behavior toward cooperation. This led to a need for systems of emotional regulation and cooperation. Scientists believe two things were key in making these relationships work. One, shared resources. The act of sharing cooked meat and maintaining the fire together created a system of mutual benefit. If you contribute to the group, you get fed and protected, which is a powerful incentive to get along. Two, reputation and social control. If someone was excessively violent or disruptive, the group could simply exclude them, which in the wild was essentially a death sentence. The desire to maintain a good reputation and stay within the safety of the group helped keep violent or annoying behavior in check. In essence, the sheer necessity of survival, staying warm, eating, and avoiding predators, forced them to manage those difficult relationships. Does the idea of reputation as a form of social control make sense in that context?
It really doesn't make sense, because if a violent or annoying person was very necessary, like the one who was hunting or the one who managed the fire the best, and then you kick them out, they would be probably very angry and would probably murder some people.
You raise a very real concern about the risk of exclusion, especially if the annoying person was highly skilled, like a top hunter. However, in these early societies, the loss of one individual, even a skilled one, was less damaging than the threat of ongoing internal chaos. The group's survival relied on collective effort, and a consistently violent or unpredictable member made that collective effort impossible. Here's why exclusion was still the most effective choice. 1. Group safety outweighs individual skill. A violent member introduces internal risk that is harder to predict and defend against than external predators. If a hunter kills other members, the entire group shrinks and becomes weaker anyway. 2. Shared knowledge. While one person might be the best at hunting or managing fire, the knowledge of how to do it was likely shared, especially around the fire at night. It was easier to replace an individual than to tolerate constant threat. 3. Cost of retaliation. A single individual leaving the group would be extremely vulnerable to predators and starvation. The cost of returning to murder former members was usually too high to risk, as they would have to leave their immediate survival needs to seek revenge. Essentially, the need for trust and order in a cooperative group was more critical than retaining a single high-skilled but high-risk member.
Well, I heard Google. Hey Google. I heard a saying that be careful of the banished village member because they're gonna come back and light it on fire. And so I also think that back in the day it was probably hard to replace people because there was a lot less people and it was harder to survive. So I don't know, I need to understand how this violence between each other during such a time of need for each other to be cool and act right, how that happened correctly.
That saying about the banished member returning is an excellent point, and it shows that the fear of revenge was definitely a factor in early social dynamics. You're absolutely right that in a world with fewer people and high mortality, losing any member was a serious setback. This is exactly why early groups developed strong mechanisms to keep people cool and acting right before they had to resort to banishment. The best defense against internal violence was constant social pressure and the development of social norms. When people spent all their time together, hunting, sleeping, and gathering around the fire, everyone was watching everyone else. If a person started to show overly aggressive tendencies, the entire group would immediately apply pressure. 1. Gossip and ridicule. These were powerful social tools to shame and isolate the problematic person, forcing them to change their behavior. 2. Rituals and sharing. Ritualized food sharing and cooperation in tasks like fire maintenance reinforce the idea that we are all in this together, making selfish or violent actions feel like a violation of a sacred trust. Banishment was always the absolute last resort, because, as you mentioned, it was risky for everyone. It was only used when a person's violent behavior was such a systemic threat that it jeopardized the safety of the children and the continuity of the entire group. In those cases, the immediate internal risk was greater than the possible external risk of a vengeful outcast. This thinking about social pressure and gossip as the first line of defense against violence helped clarify the mechanisms they used.
I find the logic to not make sense because in this day we're still dealing with the gossip and it is not answering our questions and prayers because that person that they gossip about will say that it is a lie, that it's actually about somebody else, that they're being way too mean, this and that. So you're using words to say something and then it doesn't even equal what the truth objective thing that's happening is. And that's what we're seeing now, and I can definitely imagine that that would be happening back in the day as well, especially when it was on survival. Google, Google, did you hear me? Wow. Okay, Google. So back to the topic that gossip doesn't work because the person will be lying about that it isn't even true. You tell me.
That is a critical point. If gossip is based on lies, it fails as a mechanism for keeping
Okay,
order.
Google.
However,
Google, it is not based on lies, but the other person, because they want to stay in the group, will lie that the gossip is lies.
that makes sense. You're saying the person who is the subject of negative gossip will lie to the group about their own bad behavior to avoid being isolated. The reason that defense often failed in early human groups comes down to
You
the
tell
lack
me,
of
Phil.
privacy and the constant high stakes nature of their cooperation. Everyone was highly attuned to the behavior of others because survival depended on it. If a group member was accused of, say, not sharing meat or acting violently, and that member denied it, the rest of the group didn't just have to choose whom to believe. They had to weigh the risk of believing a known risk taker against the need for overall group cohesion. If enough people had observed a pattern of bad behavior, a simple denial wasn't enough to overcome the group's collective need for order and safety. In essence, their shared reliance on each other for survival made them excellent judges of character, and a denial that went against multiple observations was easily dismissed in favor of maintaining a predictable, cooperative environment.
Google, hey Google, how come we are so bad judges of character today?
That's a fascinating question, and the main reason we aren't as good at judging character today as early humans were is scale and anonymity. Early human groups were small, maybe 30 to 50 people, and they lived in constant, high stakes visibility. Every day, you saw how someone handled food, fire, and danger, giving you consistent, reliable data on their character. Today, we interact with hundreds or thousands of people, most of them anonymously, through layers of technology, professional roles, and quick interactions. We rely on fragmented data and social signaling rather than direct, prolonged observation.
Okay,
Our social
Google.
environment does.
Never mind, continue.
I can't chat live on this device. To see which devices support chatting live, you can check the Google Help Center.
Okay, Google. I can say that I interact with the same person every day, but there's something in my brain that blocks the ability to understand what they're doing and figure out if they're good or bad.
That feeling of being blocked from understanding someone, even when you see them every day, is very common in modern life. It often comes down to the complexity and compartmentalization of our lives now. In the past, one person filled one role: hunter, cook, caregiver, and their behavior was consistent in public. Today, the same person might be a coworker, a parent, a neighbor, and a friend, and they act completely differently in each role. This means you only see a small slice of their overall character, making it much harder to get a complete picture of whether they are genuinely good or bad. Plus, modern life allows us to conceal our true intentions much better than early humans could. We use verbal complexities and politeness norms that weren't necessary when communication was immediate and focused on survival. If you are trying to understand a specific person better, sometimes focusing on small, consistent actions, like how they handle stress or how they treat people who can't help them, can be more revealing than looking at large, abstract behaviors.
Well, Google, hey Google, don't you think that maybe we are too interdependent, that we need somebody to be honest or make sense? Don't you think we should be able to not need a crazy human being?
I can't chat live on this device. To see which devices support chatting live, you can
Okay,
check the Google Help
Google.
Center.
Don't you think it's too much to need a crazy human being? Don't you think we should have some independence?
I hear you. Relying on other people can definitely feel like a heavy burden sometimes, and wanting independence is a natural human desire. While early humans were fiercely independent in terms
Okay,
of physical
Google, you
skills,
just stop right there.